A good Erev Shabbos, friends. Erev Shabbos Parshas Terumah, Erev Shabbos Zachor. Share a few words dedicated to the memory of my father, Chaim, Meir, Yisochor, Haleivi, and to my dear sister, Rasha, Chaim, Meir, whose Yotzeit is the 10th of Adar, this coming Monday. In the Parsha, it opens with the words of a Yicholi Terumah, where God tells Moshe to tell Bnei Yisrael that they shall make a contribution in order to build a sanctuary, to build a tabernacle, to build the Mishkan, the Beis HaMikdash. And the commentators all cite the Medrash that raises the question, why does it say V'yichuli Terumah? The V'yichul means they shall take from me a contribution. Really, the Torah should say V'yitnuli, they shall give. It's about asking the people to give. And the Medrash responds by citing a verse from Proverbs that says, Ki lekach tov nasati lechem. God tells of us that He gave us the great gift, the Torah, and He calls the Torah not a matana, not a gift, but ki lekach tov. Lekach means something you take, and because the Torah, the gift, is called lekach, so we learned that giving a gift, it's appropriate to use the word v'yichu, which means to take, and it has the same meaning. But the truth of the matter is, why is that great gift, the Torah, called a lekach? Why didn't God tell us, Ki matana tova nasati lechem, I gave you this good gift? And in order to answer this question, I want to note one more thing, which is that we should contemplate the meaning of the word terumah, generally translated as contribution. And indeed in Israel today, if you look at any website or any organization, you can make a terumah, a contribution. But the truth is that a contribution is really nidava, something you're giving voluntarily. Tzedakah. Terumah has another meaning. The terumah has two translations. Terumah means to set aside, to separate, to apportion. And terumah also means to raise, to increase, to elevate, to make very high. And these two things happen actually in this parsha. The Tzanzarov, Rabbi Chaim of Tzanz, notes in his work, Divrei Chaim, that we can understand this in light of another verse in the Torah, in the beginning of Parshas Kedoshim, where God commands us, Kedoshim tihiyu, you shall be holy, you shall be sanctified. How are you sanctified? The Ramban says, to be sanctified means to consecrate our actions in the mundane. That the Torah commands us, Kadosh atzvecha v'mutaloch, that there are things that the Torah permits us to engage in, and even those permitted pleasures and permitted things that we may enjoy, we have to curb ourselves, not become hedonists, and control ourselves even in the area with the matters that are permitted. So that as a Jew, not only do we have to avoid things that the Torah forbids, but we have to be careful and discipline ourselves not to become a novel b'shus HaTorah, not to become a hedonist in matters that the Torah permits us to do. It says that Tzanzarov. Let's understand this in the context of our Parsha. V'yichuli terumah. God says v'yichuli. V'yichu doesn't just mean to make a contribution, but translate is v'yichu. You want to take me, God says. You want to connect with me? The first thing is terumah. Separate yourselves. Control yourselves. Designate yourselves for my purpose. How do you designate yourself for God? By having discipline and separating yourselves from overindulging and overengaging in the things that are permitted. How do you do this? It would seem in every mitzvah there's a precise measure. The Torah tells us how much matzah we have to eat on Pesach. Every mitzvah has an amount. When it comes to the mitzvah of kadosh atzvecha b'mutaloch, of controlling ourselves and avoiding overindulgence, the Torah doesn't tell us how much and how exactly to do this, because it varies by individual. And because it varies by individual, here again the Parsha says, Mikoli terumah me'es kol ish asher yidvenu libo. Every person according to how much his heart requires it. Of course, Yidvenu means how generous he is. It says that Tzanzarov that although Yidvenu means how generous, but the word Yidvenu comes from the word in the double, which means voluntarily. In other words, every person knows how much he has to give, how much he has to take, how much he has to control himself. So this word Yidvenu also is a remez, a hint, and it alludes to the fact that this can also mean the person must not just give tzedakah for the Mishkan, one must separate himself and curb himself from overindulging. How much? Me'ez kolish, from as much as you are a person. In other words, evaluate your circumstances and determine how much your heart needs in order to do that. That's how we separate. But ultimately, in Torah and mitzvahs, it's not about, and Yiddishkeit, it's not about separating ourselves from the world. It's not about avoiding our interaction with the world. Separating is only the first step. It's about elevating. When we learn to control ourselves and to direct ourselves in the right way, and to direct every interaction towards God, the next thing is that those interactions with the world and with the material become elevated, which is the second translation of Terumah. As Onkelos says, this is supposed to be an elevation. And in fact, this word Terumah, in the context of elevation and increasing and making greater, we mention it commonly in our daily davening. We say in Shemot Esrei, Semach David Avdach Hamedes Tzmiach V'Kadnei Torah B'Shua Secha. We ask God to be perfect Mashiach. May God Kadnei Torah increase His glory. Terumah is from the word Terumah. We read the verse of Tehillim, Vayorim Ken Olam. May God increases and raises the glory of the Jewish people. So the context, this concept of Terumah meaning and elevation is not foreign to us, because ultimately in Yiddishkeit, it's never about avoidance. It's about learning to have the proper engagement, so that we can elevate ourselves and elevate our activities. Which brings us to the first point we made about the Yikuli Terumah, about taking. Really, it's about giving. Says the Divrei Chaim, when you study Torah, Torah is not just engaging with a gift that God gave us in the past. But every time we study Torah, we're receiving the Torah, right? We don't just say that when we make a bracha for the daily Torah learning, we say, Baruch atah Hashem noseina Torah. Blessed are you, God, who gives us the Torah in the present. Every moment of Torah learning is a moment of receiving the revelation from God. Every mitzvah is a moment of receiving a revelation and engaging with God. It's never about using a gift that God gave us in the past. It's the active engagement with God. And so, similarly here, when one is engaged in directing one's activities towards God, one is actually taking Kedusha, holiness, into oneself, separating and elevating. When one is giving tzedakah, one is taking the material item and not just giving it as a gift to God, but bringing in some Kedusha into the world. And so ultimately, the mitzvah to build a sanctuary is about separating and about elevating. And one more point on the Parsha, we read a mitzvah to wipe out the name of Amalek. Amalek is begimatria sofek. The numerical word value for the word Amalek is the same as that of doubt. It's that force which tries to sow doubt whenever there's religious fervor and whenever we get engaged with Kedusha. One way to overcome Amalek is to remember we constantly have to elevate. And in Torah mitzvahs, there is no being the status quo. If you're static, you're decreasing. When you're on a path towards elevation, towards religious upward mobility, then that overrides all doubt and accomplishes good things. May it be the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as we study the Torah of this Parsha, God will bless us to raise the glory of the righteous Mashiach, who will come immediately and take us to Yerushalayim, to Geula, to build, and we'll celebrate Shabbos, Parshas Zachor, Yerushalayim, with the Beis HaMikdash, with Mashiach Tzidkenu. God bless you. Have a wonderful Shabbos.